Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Breaking news at this hour. We have some exclusive reporting tonight from MS Now about a top Trump official directly intervening in the effort to deceive the American people about the killing of Renee Good by ICE earlier this month. Now, we've known for a while now the Trump Department of Justice is refusing to investigate Jonathan Ross, the ICE officer who killed Good. Instead, the DOJ wanted to investigate Renee Good and her grieving widow. MS Now previously reported that a half dozen leaders of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division resigned in protest over the decision not to investigate Ross, something that happens quite often in law enforcement shootings. Separately, several federal prosecutors who are based in Minnesota, including the number 2 in the office, also resigned in protest of the decision to investigate Good's widow. We've also learned that the FBI supervisor in Minneapolis, a person who sought to open an investigation into the killing of Good, again, which would be essentially standard practice, stepped down in protest over what the Trump DOJ is doing. Now, thanks to MS Now reporters Carol Leonnig and Ken Delaney, and we know that it was aides in the office of Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche that directed federal investigators in Minnesota to shut down the investigation into the killing of Good and instead probe the victim for possible criminal liability. 3 people briefed on the discussion say those aides wanted a criminal investigation into Renee Good, who was shot 3 times at point-blank range while trying to drive away from officers in her Honda Pilot. A federal judge rejected a warrant to investigate Good, citing the fact that the woman had died. These revelations come as thousands spent the day braving absolutely frigid sub-zero temperatures to protest to what's happening in Minneapolis and stand up for their friends, neighbors, and community. Today, more than 100 clergy members were arrested at a demonstration at the Minneapolis airport. They're calling for airlines to stop working with the Trump administration to deport detainees from their community. It was just one element of the collective action we saw across the state today. Hundreds of local workers, a number of labor unions participating in a general strike, bringing much of the city to a standstill, something we really haven't seen in this country citywide in decades. As one participating bar owner explained to the Washington Post, quote, "This is what the world's going to look like if you take our hardworking neighbors away." Post also reports that some cafes stayed open, not as places of business, but as free community spaces to allow demonstrators to stay warm, make signs, drink free coffee. And people who work in organizing spaces will tell you this level of labor solidarity is hard to come by these days. It speaks to just how truly disgusted people are feeling. Regular folks, apolitical people, we have read interview after interview after interview with them, have become radicalized by the way they're seeing ICE treat their friends and neighbors.
Have you ever gone out to these sort of things before?
Never. I've never protested in my life. My brother's here. He does it all the time. I've never. Yeah. Like I said, I'm far enough away, but close enough, and I'm sitting in my cushy house and look at and get mad, and I think they're just trying to scare people, and but why shoot people? You know what really pisses me off is the fact that they detain people, cuff them, and then still beat the out of them. They tell you it's immigrants, only immigrants. It's anybody. I have friends that got detained, and all they were doing was driving home from work. What the?
It sounds like you don't fit the definition of the.
No, I'm not paid to be here like everybody says. What the is that? I got to work in the goddamn morning, just like everybody else.
What? You don't fit the definition of the anti-fascist terrorist that
that we're labeled. That I'm labeled now. Yeah, exactly. What the is that? I'm just here trying to stand up for community, dude.
I'm just trying to stand up for my community. That is, of course, what Renee Good was doing before she was killed by ICE. Something the Trump administration wanted to criminally charge her for posthumously, apparently. I'm joined now by one of the MS reporters who broke the story. Carol Leonnig is a senior investigative reporter, co-author of Injustice, How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department. Carol, this is great reporting and also illuminating, because one of these stories where we could sort of see dots, from the outside, but not the connection, like we saw the resignation. So tell us about what was the directive folks received from Main Justice via Todd Blanche's aides?
Chris, first, thank you so much for focusing on this issue. I think it's really important because Americans are calling me and our fellow MS Now reporters constantly with tips and suggestions about what's happening in Minnesota. Sources are taking some great risks inside government because this is making them livid and sort of disgusted with their government. And I'm quoting them about that. I'm not a partisan. I just want to emphasize, I think it's really important to focus on Minnesota because the whole world is looking at what's going on here. And that's why I've spent a week, along with my colleague Ken, trying to nail this story of what happened with the Renee Good investigation. What happened when an FBI agent tried to open a civil rights investigation in the hours and days after she had been killed while unarmed and trying to pull away from officers who tried to detain her. So what we learned was this, that after agents in Minneapolis did what they would normally do in this kind of shooting with a federal officer of an unarmed civilian, began to open up an investigation into the shooting, they wanted to get a search warrant for her car, which had been taken away from the scene, because they wanted to reconstruct the ballistics for a civil rights investigation of the officer. It doesn't mean the officer did something wrong. It means that when a federal officer shoots and kills somebody, we look into it to make sure that the use of deadly force was appropriate. So that investigation went nowhere because the folks in Todd Blanche, Deputy Attorney General Blanche's office, directed that the U.S. attorney, the acting U.S. attorney there, shutter that investigation and that FBI agents instead redraw the search warrant with a different subject. In other words, instead of a civil rights investigation, the subject matter was going to be Renee Good as a suspect attacking a federal officer, or what's called, in parlance, AFO, assault on a federal officer. What's so unusual about this, Chris, and the reason I really wanted to verify and corroborate and ultimately report this, what's so shocking is that a magistrate judge shut down this warrant and said no. And it's not that shocking now that you know what it's about, but it's just not normal for a federal magistrate judge to say to a prosecutor, you haven't met this really low burden of proof that there might be a crime here. The judge turned to the prosecutors, I'm told by sources, and said, she's dead. We are not going to proceed.
That detail that a magistrate judge said no is, again, I think the context, the sort of baseline here is important because we've now seen these things that were unthinkable become quite common. Grand juries refusing to indict, for instance. Magistrate judges dinging federal prosecutors. I mean, these are kind of 99.9% propositions. I don't think that's an exaggeration, honestly. I think in the ordinary course of things, it's probably a 999 times out of 1,000 kind of thing. We're talking about like incredibly rare. We got news just a day ago that a federal magistrate judge dinged the federal prosecutors over a possible either warrant or charge of Don Lemon. So what you're saying is, and this is previously unreported, they wanted to get a warrant to search the car in furtherance of a criminal investigation into the deceased Renee Good for having assaulted a federal officer, as opposed to in furtherance of an open-ended civil rights inquiry into the nature of the use of force.
That's right. And you can now see, even if there were more warrants later after this one was rejected, which we're trying to understand what happened after this, after the judge said no way, you can see why this is so important to figure out. Because it was the first bomb that detonated in federal law enforcement in Minnesota about this death. It led to 6 prosecutors who work in Main Justice saying, we're retiring and resigning earlier. We didn't want to work in the Civil Rights Division unit that investigates police shootings if we're not allowed to investigate this one, but we're really mad about this. It led to 6 federal prosecutors in Minneapolis saying, were out, including the number 2, who had been the acting U.S. attorney and had a lengthy career as a career prosecutor and had led the investigations of fraud of NGOs in Minnesota, by the way. it also, now we know today, it led to a FBI agent who was a top supervisor resigning in the last several hours because she was disgusted and very disturbed by the handling of this shooting investigation, which she was involved in and helped oversee. So every which way that the government has handled this death and this shooting by a federal officer, including the President of the United States saying it's justified and the Vice President saying it's justified, every single which way it has really harmed this city and our Justice Department and our sense of justice in Minneapolis.
Just to reiterate, I think this is obvious and people know this, but the individuals you're talking about in the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Main Justice, in the Minnesota field office and the FBI agent, these are all career officials. These are all people who are civil servants. They're not like appointees. They're not like people of, they're not political holdovers from the Biden administration, et cetera, et cetera. I want to read the paragraph in your reporting about the FBI supervisor, Tracy Mergen, an FBI supervisor in the Minneapolis field office who oversees fraud and public corruption cases, resigned in frustration over the handling by the Justice Department leadership of the Good shooting investigation and the pivot of the original search warrant subject, according to two of the sources. Mergen is said to be frustrated as well with the Trump administration's decision to treat protesters in Minnesota as possible domestic terrorists and conduct mass arrests of people peaceably protesting, according to two people familiar with her decision. Again, this is an FBI supervisor we're talking about here, who is so broken up by the behavior coming from the White House direction that she's leaving her post.
That's right. That's right. I think there's such an interesting connection or analogy, I guess, between how now people who had the job, a public service job, to uphold the Constitution, to equally administer the law, to carefully and faithfully be honest with the court about when they have evidence that there's an actual crime, those people are saying, hey, the rule of law is being monkeyed around with in a way that I can't stomach anymore. And on the other side, you see Minnesotans, and I hope no one takes any offense about the regionalism I'm about to describe, but, Minnesotans with their, by gosh, by golly, this just isn't right. There's a parallel element going on there where they're saying, wait a minute, this isn't okay that ICE agents are detaining 5-year-old children and stopping off-duty police officers because they're brown and blocking them in with their cars and threatening them until they identify themselves as a police officer. This is not, somebody's monkeying around with the foundation of what makes America special.
No, I think this is such an important point as we look at these images today, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. This shared sense that there's something very wrong here and some lines being crossed is not just the people in the streets today. It's not just random observers or residents of Minnesota or people looking, but people in the deepest parts of the federal government tasked with meting out justice, lifetime law enforcement officials who are having exactly the same reaction, as confirmed by your excellent and careful reporting today. Carol Leonnig, it's such a gift to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for focusing on this.